welcome to Community Camera, a special GATV production featuring people of interest from our community. Tonight we join Peggy Galloway as she interviews Walter Otto of Gladstone.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight our guest is Walter Otto, who has been a long-time resident of this community, and it's a pleasure for us to have you with us this evening, Walter.
Thank you.
And we'd like to hear about the Otto story. The Ottos have lived in this community for a long time, and you have been a part of that family as long as they have lived here. So perhaps you could tell us how your ancestors came to this country and when.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, they landed in New York. They came from Russia, landed in New York about sometime in the last quarter of the 19th century.
And what was
at
this,
New York.
Was this your...
My well, my dad was the only one born in Russia.
I see. So this would
only
be his
child.
parents.
And that is, so there was my grandparents and my father.
And their names were?
Well, they were both Henry. My grandfather was Henry, or Heinrich, and my grandmother was Catherine, and Dad, of course, was Henry Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And they landed in New York. Grandmother told me later it took them 21 days to come from Hamburg, Germany, to New York. Not the kind of sailing they had nowadays.
No. That wouldn't be a sailing vessel, well, that would be...
Oh yes, it was a sailing vessel, I think.
Was it?
Well, to take 21 days, I think it must have been.
Oh, I suppose.
Well, anyway, then they moved into South Dakota, and my grandparents worked for a Negro couple, as strange as that may seem, knowing the history of the United States. And I think they were there, well, there was about 4 or 5 children born there. I don't really know how many.
Mm-hmm.
And then they came up to Winnipeg, east of Winnipeg, in a place called Lydiot.
Would you like to name those 4 or 5 children that were...
Well, the only one that I think, there was 2 died one year with typhoid. So the only one I think that the first one born in Manitoba was, I think my Uncle Carl. But there was a Lydia and a Paul born down in the States. See, 2 of them died, so that cut the family down. Mm-hmm. And then there was another, I guess, 4 born up in Manitoba.
When they were in South Dakota working for this Negro couple, now they were farming. This was on a farm.
On a farm, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess grandmother, she probably helped around the house and fed the pigs and things like this, which goes with the territory.
Women's duties in those days.
And then they moved up. The grandfather always had a habit of having a lot of people with him, like he was sort of a leader. And so I don't know how many families came up to Manitoba with them.
This would still be before the turn of the century, was it?
Oh yes, they came up about, it was 18... Well, the first one born was in 1901, I think, up here. So,
mm-hmm. So it would be before
my
the turn of
dad
the
and I
century.
was born in 7, so my parents got married in. No, I was born in 9. They got married in 1907, so they were up here just at the turn of the century, I guess.
There were a lot of people that came up from the States, migrated up to the prairie provinces in around that time, wasn't there? Like, do you have any idea of what was behind?
Well, our family and my mother's family had moved up from the States. And then, of course, if you went west, of course, it was terrific migration from the south.
And this probably was to get a homestead and
they had homesteads and
cheap land.
And of course, east of Winnipeg was all bush country. Mm-hmm. My dad helped build the first transmission line for electricity into Winnipeg. And
could you explain that what you mean by transmission
well,
line?
it's the power lines, the big power lines that bring the main power from the hydro stations.
Oh, I see.
The water stuff. And he said different times that they had on that bog, they had to lay corduroy roads to get in to build the transmission lines. Like they were all, those days, those steel towers were the original.
Oh, is that right?
Original hydro lines. And then they moved. I don't know how long they stayed there. Those are parts of it that are a bit hazy, but because I was pretty young. But they moved into Winnipeg in sometime in the early 1900s, and they stayed a couple of years. Then they went back out to Lydia down to the farms, and then they moved back into Winnipeg and stayed there till 1917, and then they came to Gladstone.
What was your family doing when
well, my
they were living in Winnipeg?
they all in the Winnipeg. Well, my grandfather helped lay the first pave the Main Street from I think it started at the CPR station, the subway there, and north with cedar blocks, about 6-inch blocks, and they laid them end on end, side by side, as close as they could fit them, and that's the way they paved that wide street.
It's hard to visualize when you see Main Street now.
Yeah.
That's the way it was paved at one time,
just
isn't it?
Shoved them into the mud there.
But they would need something in that gumbo, wouldn't they?
Well, they even had I crossed the Sauter Street Bridge, the old Sauter Street Bridge, when I was a youngster, and they had wooden blocks paved on top of that too.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, and have you any idea where they'd get these cedar?
I think they must have come locally because the railways were pretty young then and new. I don't know. They didn't leave some of the railways finished there, like the one coming through Gladstone wasn't finished then. I don't think.
Oh, is that right? And what did your father do in Winnipeg?
Well, he was worked for the CNR in the different jobs, like out in the yards. They kept track of the number of the cars on the sidings and things like that they do with computer now. They just run them past a computer. I was in the Symington yards there shortly after they opened it, and these big trains that go through, and every number was registered without anybody ever looking at them, really.
Quite a change. And I would assume a lot less employees than what they used to have.
Of course, at that time, nearly everybody worked for the railway. If you went out in the country, every 7 miles there was a section house with 4 or 5 men working.
That's right.
Even in Gladstone here, right up till a few years ago.
That's the way it was.
Yeah.
So, your family decided to go back to the farm then?
Well, I had an uncle that wasn't very good. Dad's oldest brother wasn't very good health, and I think part of that was on account of his health. He had an enlarged heart, and it just kept growing till eventually it smothered him. But and the war, I think, had something to do with it too, because with their nationality in 1917, 14 to 18, it wasn't a very popular nationality.
I see.
So that was, I think, one of the reasons that they got out.
So they wanted to get away from the city.
Away from the city and well, what do you call it? Well, it's a boycott, more or less. Like, you
I
just
suppose, yeah.
have to watch everything you said. And I know Dad told this story. One morning he was feeling pretty good, and I don't know my dates in history, but I guess he was whistling, and he couldn't whistle with a hoot. He's always off key. But he was walking down the tracks and between the cars there and taking numbers, and he was whistling away to himself. And this one fellow said to him, he says, "What are you so happy about?" And he just off the spur of the moment, he says, "Because the king is dead." And I guess one of the George was a King Edward or somebody just died. And he just popped out of him like that. And he just about got fired over it. So,
yes, people weren't very open-minded
no.
in those times, were they?
Well, it was still going on.
Yes.
The prejudice.
Yeah, that's a good word for it. Now, you have a family Bible, Walter. Could you tell us about it? Unfortunately, we don't have it here, but I did have the opportunity of seeing it, and it's a beautiful heirloom to have in your family. And this was originally the property of...
As far as I know, my grandfather, my dad's father, because the dedication inside it was presented to him after my grandfather left the farm.
I see.
He'd given it to Dad.
And that was what, 19?
Well, it was about in the 50s, I think.
Oh, I see.
See, 37. It might have been earlier than that. Well, he may have kept it for a while too, you know, because they both, my grandmother and him, were reading it all the time. So as you could tell by looking at it, it was pretty dog-eared.
Yes, and it's about so deep, isn't it? And
well, it's like the old Bibles used to be in the churches.
Yes, that's right. It is.
They had them great big ones, you know.
And one of the unique things about this is it's written in German, isn't it?
Yeah, it's German.
And it was certainly, as you say, used very much. And you have all your family, or the family records were put in it.
Yes.
Currently at that time.
A lot of them I can't read because they're written in German. You see, there's two. The printing is not bad. I can kind of decipher that a little if I work hard at it. But the writing, I haven't got a clue. It just looks like a bunch of crow tracks through the snow.
Is that right? Yeah.
So, and a lot of the early records are written like that, and I haven't a clue what they mean.
Now, your father has handwritten some notes in there at the front of that Bible, and it's beautiful handwriting.
Well, he did so much of it, I guess he just got good at it.
But you said that, you know, he was a self-taught man, wasn't he?
Well, I don't know. I never did hear how far he went to school. He didn't go very far.
But it was certainly beautiful penmanship.
Well, I always thought so. Precise, and it's just one letter like another, you know, there's no variation.
Now, when you moved to Gladstone, and you've been used to living in the city mainly, is that right?
Well, yes, I never lived any other place, really.
What did you think of this farm life?
Well, I told you the other day when I got in here, when we got in, I was only 8 years old, and when we got in about midnight or 1 o'clock when these trains come in from Winnipeg, dark as the inside of a boot, somebody there with a Democrat picked us up with my mother and 5 children, because Dad had come out in the spring to help put the crop in.
Oh, the crop was already in there.
Yeah, we had the 1970 crop belonged to us. And go home, go to bed, and at 8 o'clock in the morning we were out picking stones into a 10-pound syrup pail. So I was not too struck with farming, I can tell you, for quite a while after that.
At that time you didn't think you'd want to make that your career?
It was a long time afterwards. Yes. Actually, till we got started running as long as my grandfather was the boss and my uncle, Dad's oldest brother, were the bosses. I never did like it, but I didn't have much choice.
What did your brothers think too? How many?
Well, of course, they were younger than I was. You see, my two sisters were in. There was Oscar and myself, and Oscar, and then my 2 sisters, and then Carl. He was only just a baby when we came out. Then Art was born the next year in 18. So we were all just little gaffers, so we didn't have much choice, and I suppose not supposed to have a mind of our own either.
Right, supposed to be seen and not heard.
Which pretty well carries through till you're an adult and long afterwards. You're not supposed to have a mind of your own.
At that time.
Even today. Yet today, oh no. If you think you got a mind of your own today, you sure soon get straightened up.
Could you tell us the name of all your brothers and sisters?
Well, the first one was Lydia. She died before I was on the scene. Well, I was a baby. I guess I never knew her. And it was myself, Walter, and Oscar, and Frida, and Dorothy, and Carl, and Art, and Fred. Well, there was Audrey, I guess, in between there, and then Fred, Audrey died when she was 12. Fred, Albert, and Bob. There was 9 boys and actually 4 girls in the total family.
Well, that was quite a family for your parents to raise, then, eh?
Yeah. But it was many a happy day.
So you would go to Pembroke School when you came, eh?
Yeah, it was too long.
Too long?
1 year too long.
I thought you didn't really go very long to Pembroke School, though, did you?
Well, let's see, about 3 years.
And so that made you about 11 years old, and you'd
I was 11 when I
finished your
got
grade
to
8?
grade 8. And then my folks wouldn't let me write it. Made me go back another year.
They thought you were too young to quit school.
And too old, not old enough to go to work. They had to get that work in there somewhere. Yeah, that was a long year, that one.
Well, it would be sort of boring, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But that was a pretty young age to be complete.
Well, I
with
missed
your
2
grading.
grades, and I started when I was 5.
Oh, I see.
So I put 6 years. So actually 7 then when I had to take it the second time.
Now, but later on you went to high school. At what age?
Yes, well, I was
Could you tell us about how that came about?
Well, I didn't think I was new enough, so Mr. Rogers, Doug Rogers' brother, was a minister of education, so I took a notion one time to go in and see him about correspondence and one thing and another. So he fixed me up with that and asked me if he could get somebody to maybe help me a little bit. Well, I was, 24 years old, I think, when I did this. And so he got all the correspondence papers for a couple of years. I came in, and Mr. Maris was a school principal here at the high school. I went to see him about getting some help. And he says, well, he says, well, I'll help you out. But he said, why don't you come to school if you got not too busy? Well, a lot of brothers at home then, and I didn't like work that well. So I decided to go to school, back to school. And the principal was the only one in this high school who was older than I was. So I had a pretty good time. I took grade 9 and 10 the first year, and Edith Adamson was in grade 9 that year. My brother Fred was in grade 9.
Is that right?
Yeah, and he was about 10 or 11 years younger than me. So anyway, I had a good time that year. I didn't learn much, but I sure had a good time.
But you know, at that time, adults weren't going back and getting their schooling, were they?
No, but I always
did you know of anyone else at that time that was doing this?
No.
So that took a lot of courage, didn't it?
Well, either that or none at all. Senseless.
No.
There's 2 ways of looking at it.
I would say it took a lot of courage, and that you were ahead of your time, because later on, and like today, it's quite fashionable. We have pensioners going back and getting their university and this sort of thing. But at that time, people weren't doing this, and it must have taken a lot of courage.
Well, it wasn't really easy, but once I got in there, well, then it was fine. I was sort of the granddaddy of the school,
Kingpin.
Yeah.
Kingpin of the class.
No, it was not that easy.
Go ahead.
Took the grade 9 and 10 the 1 year, and then I went back the next year in 11, and I got fed up with it, and I quit at Easter.
That's unfortunate.
I don't think so. You get too smart. I think we've got too many smart people today. Or overeducated.
They keep telling us that we're not smart enough, so I don't know.
Yeah, but I don't think that has anything to do with education.
Well, perhaps. I don't know. No. We won't go into that one.
No,
now.
I hope not.
Anyway, it must have been quite a change for your mother when she came out.
Well, the big problem there was that she lived with her grandparents. With my grandparents.
With her in-laws.
There was 4 generations moved into the house there where Tom is living today. It's not quite the same looking house, but there was 4 generations moved into that house.
I see.
And of course, the bottom part of that generation didn't have anything to say. They were just chattels and sort of, well, I've told many a time, we heard that if it hadn't been for them, you know, or us, we'd have starved to death. Well, it was the opposite way around, because my grandfather had no help. His youngest son died when he was 18, just a couple of years after we came out here. And so my dad supplied the help. We were the workhorses on the farm, because we had all these boys. And
you were the labor.
Yeah.
The labor force.
Yeah. And but Mother, when finally in 1921, I think it was, she told Dad that you better build her a house, or she was going to take the kids and move out onto the road. And that was it. So we had a house then next year.
And that must have been quite decision for her to make that statement, because women didn't do that in those. They accepted whatever was.
Oh, not in its entirety. My grandmother didn't seem as though she was running the place, but boy, I don't know how they do it, but
she was the iron fist.
They're showing it out openly now, but in those days they were sneaky. Oh, I'm telling you.
Sometimes we get accused of that in these days.
Yeah, and I think when she moved into that house, and it was never finished while she was there inside, that was the happiest moment of her life.
I'm sure.
She's sure.
And especially, you know, raising such a big family, it must have been a really happy moment for her. Now, you were saying that a while back that your grandfather, he lost the farm.
Yeah, they just, I was looking at the figures today there, and the land was bought for $30 an acre, and there was what, 800?
And that was 1917.
Yeah,
that was
16,
the value.
I guess it would be 16, yeah.
1916, $30 an acre.
For 800 acres.
So how would that compare to today?
Well, it's $300, $400. I was offered here a few years back $800 an acre for it.
So it wasn't as high, but it was high for the years that followed.
Well, the bottom fell out of everything. $30 an acre was considered high because it was in the war years, and grain was a little higher than normal. And after that, of course, the bottom fell out of everything. That some of the figures you look at, it just what I told you the other day there, that Clayton shipped a carload of oats one time and got a bill back from the railway for freight. Didn't even pay the freight.
That must have been terribly, terribly discouraging.
And
even now we don't hear of that, do we?
But then the government comes to the rescue now and makes up some of the but it shouldn't be. But this was then, of course, interest was 8% or something like that. And when you look at I went through a lot of those figures today, and when you look at the interest that was paid from 1917 to 1933, it hardly the principal was hardly ever touched.
Is that right?
And then the taxes were terrific. Like when they dug a ditch out through the marsh there, from Grassy River down to Woodside practically. Well, where the Blairs lived there was a drag line running there, a floating dredge, and another one over here a mile north of town, and a mile east. And for the Americans, we're going to settle all that marsh.
Oh, I see.
So they tried to drain it. Well, the drainage tax was about double of what the land taxes were. And they put that drainage tax on the people just within a mile or two of the
They were going to pay for those Americans to come over here.
So it just killed everybody. They finally dropped it and spread that debt over the whole province. But for a while there, that drainage tax was just a killer.
It was terribly unfair.
Yeah.
terribly unfair.
And then by this time we got here, the Americans had all gone already pretty well.
Oh, I see.
And there was coal piles out through that marsh there all over the place. You know, in the spring when the snow started to go, they were digging all winter. They had to haul coal out to fire the boilers, and they'd put on a big load in town here and get paid for it to haul it, and then they'd drop it, half of it off when they got out town away, so the horses couldn't pull it anymore. So it was coal all over the place out there.
Well, that's interesting.
Well, it's just
What happened?
cushions, you know. People were just a little dishonest then too at times.
But you were able to get that property back, weren't you? Like your family.
Well,
Time got that.
it went up for tax sale, and the mortgage company, of course, there was a second mortgage, but the first mortgage, North of Scotland Mortgage Company, they paid the taxes, and of course they automatically owned the land. And so they sold it back to us, like the next generation, like my mother and my brother Oscar and myself bought it, because we were the only two in the family over 21 years of age. So, and we bought that, believe it or not, I think it was $11,000, 5 quarters. And
That was a good investment.
I think so, but
But it wasn't easy at the time.
for 50 years afterwards, there was a mortgage on it, one way or another.
Well, no, it wasn't. It sounds very like a bargain now, but it wasn't easy to pay them.
Well, you know, you raise a family. Originally, then we had to buy, like when my brother, he couldn't farm, so but he sold his share. I owned a third of it. My mother owned a third of it. So I had to buy my third to Dad. So when Dad quit farming, I had to buy his share, buy part of Oscar's share. So I had to borrow money to do that. So there was a mortgage. So it just kept on going till about 8 or 9 years ago. We had it paid for in '51. That's when we paid it, the original mortgage of that we bought.
Yeah.
And of course the war years were good to us, you know, for
Right.
and so we got it paid off, and then I had to borrow money again when I started in on my own. And then kids going to school, and finally I had to put the wife to work.
Well,
Things got
that's the
tough.
kind of a wife to have, is one that would
but you know,
work.
how can you choose all the time, you know?
Well,
I
sometimes
didn't marry her because she was a school teacher, but it helped.
Yeah, either a school teacher or nurse. They were a good thing to have in those days. Now, during the war years, your family made quite a sacrifice. Many of your family members enlisted. How many?
Well, that was the change between the First World War and the Second one. You see, we were really ostracized, and another thing that I'd like to mention is that through my lifetime, I had to change nationalities depending on which side in those two wars our allies were. I was a Russian once in a while, I was a German once in a while, and then there were no Canadians till a few years ago, so you couldn't claim Canadian citizenship. So it was a kind of a jigsaw puzzle, but it finally got settled down. But then, of course, there was five of them, actually 4 in the active service.
And could you name them before the...
Well, Oscar, Fred, Carl,
and
and Albert. And then Art, actually, I think Art got a number 2, but he went down to Portage and got the measles, and they didn't look after him very well, and he's been wearing glasses ever since.
So he'd be categorized.
And by this time, they were getting a little bit scared too many farm boys joining up, and they needed the produce of the farms to keep the war going.
That's right.
Feed all these men that were over there. So they started. You couldn't enlist if you wanted to. Towards the last couple of years, there was no way. They just wouldn't take you. Mr. Browning, I think, was one of the deferred, what they called it, deferral people. That
where you were needed.
Yeah.
Must have been an awfully worrisome time for your mother.
Well, I don't think
For
she
your
had,
parents,
I don't think she had a good night's sleep for 5 years anyway.
I'm sure.
Dad didn't show his worries that much, but with her it was there all the time.
No, it must have been, because she would never know when
No.
that.
And I guess there was thousands like her.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
The Ottos must have liked farming, though. That's my feeling.
Well, they farmed in Russia, and they farmed basically here, with the exception of those 4 years or a few years in Winnipeg.
Mm-hmm.
But they were good. Dad went to night school in Winnipeg, and he learned be a pretty good carpenter. He could make furniture and things like this, and so it come in quite handy on the farm. There was never a screen window with holes in it or anything like that. Everything was fixed, and so he learned that there. And my grandfather was, I told you the other day, was what they call a millwright in these mills at the time, places of work where your power source was all transmitted from a shaft with pulleys on it and belts running from the pulleys to whatever different kind of a machine you were using. And he was a real man with his hands. He could, like your lacing belts and all these sort of things, and he could braid and put anything.
That's quite an art to braid the lacings on some of those belts, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm going to put a pair of horsehair lines over in the museum here one of these days for everybody can have a look at it.
Could you tell us more about those horsehair lines?
Well, we used to save all the horsehair. Comb the tails and the manes pretty good, like, you know. And in the spring we used to even cut the manes right off when we were clipping the horses. So you'd get a big bundle of, and this was treated the same as if you've ever seen sheep wool carded. Well, this was done much the same. You know, you cleaned the hair good and brushed them out good, and then he'd take a pile of this, and he would take it under his arm, and he had a little board, 2 boards, they're about that long maybe, that you could rub together like this, and there was 3 hooks on the side. So he'd have this. To get these threads, he'd hook a thread on each one of these hooks, and then I'd stand there and I'd twist this thing, you know, and while he fed these 3 little strands out of this pile of hair under his arm. And of course he'd roll it up and ball, and when he figured he had enough to be worth starting, then he'd take 8 of these strings and braid them into 1 rope.
I see.
And that was our winter driving. They never got stiff, they didn't get cold, like the hair was always warm.
Simple.
Yeah. And never got cold either. They were warm all the time. So we had halter shanks. You know what that is, don't you?
Oh, yes.
And lines, a couple of sets of lines, and lots of halter shanks. And there are no halter shanks left. But there's this one set of lines I found that Dad had hung up in the granary, right up in the eaves there.
I bet there were a lot of farmers who envied you for those lines.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it.
I would think so.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Because I myself have never heard of them before.
Well, I don't think, I'd never seen any anywhere else either. Yeah, that's...
Now, there are still Ottos on the old farm, aren't there?
Yeah,
You've
two of
still
our
got sons farming.
children, yeah.
Yeah. Tom and
Ken.
Ken.
Ken's the oldest.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
And he tried doing something else for a while, and then...
Well, yes, after he got out of when he quit university, he went to work in Winnipeg for a while because, I was still there, and Tom wanted to farm, and so he tried to try his wings a little bit, I guess. But he came back, and I think he's doing very well.
That's good. So how would you compare farming from when you first knew it till now?
Well, in one way I think it's deteriorated.
In what way?
Well, costs have outstripped the benefits for some reason or other. And I don't think the people don't do enough work anymore. The takeover Not that I'm in favor of work at all. I hated it. But you have to, if non-work comes too expensive, then you have to start thinking of an alternative.
What do you mean by non-work too expensive?
Well, because we've got all this equipment nowadays.
Automation.
And as I said before, we got diesel fuel for John Deere D delivered a barrel at a time. Now they bring 1,000 gallons out at a time.
Or more.
Yeah. And a few days later they seem to be gone. Then you got a bill for $1,000, $1,500. And there's no similarity in the costs and the work that the people do. Like if you go, if a farmer today worked 1,000 hours, I imagine he'd be pretty getting close to the maximum of himself.
Now this would be a grain farmer. A grain farmer, you mean? Or
well, yeah, but even the other farmers.
Is that right?
They don't pitch bales anymore. They don't stook. They don't, all these things are a thing of the past. And they all cost money.
Mm-hmm. Like, well, looking after cattle, as an example, too, is a lot less than nothing.
If you're set up for it.
Mm-hmm.
You got, so that everybody, the farmers think they're working hard, but when you go downtown here, like I do every morning at 9 o'clock, 5 days a week, and see a lineup of trucks coming for coffee, and some of them come 8 and 10 miles, and then pay $1 for a cup of coffee.
You realize all the young farmers in the country are going to...
I don't give a hoot. I'll tell it to their faces. So that what can you expect? And you're paying $2.50 a gallon for the gas they burn, coming in for that coffee. I walked the town often, and I drove up till I was 60 or 50.
Is that right?
Yeah. Even after I had a car. Or in the winter time, instead of hooking a team of horses up, I could go run this 2.5 miles in 15 minutes. Took longer than that hooking horses up and put them away. See, they don't do that anymore.
And how much land could you work with that barrel of distillate? And what?
Well, I'd say you could plow a quarter section with it.
With a barrel of
With
distillate?
a barrel of distillate. At that time, they were about, what, $5, $6?
I suppose. And now, to do that much land, what's it going to cost?
It'd probably take 3 barrels with one of those big tractors. I know through the years, every tractor that was ever got of a supposedly improvement, it cost more money to operate per acre than the one they had before.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. All it does is does it faster. So when you do it faster and you don't, well, the boys are farming 3 times as much land now as we did to start with.
Right.
But look what it's costing.
So, and this is progress.
This is progress. This was, I told you the other day, I think we're living in the Stone Age as far as progress is concerned, because we're still trying to operate with the same system that we had when we were driving oxen. All we've eliminated is hours of work. And every time you eliminate that, somebody loses a job.
Great.
So we've got this terrific unemployment today. I have believed, like, when they talk about technocracy, when I joined technocracy 35 years, in 1935, the idea was at that time, their theory was that you could pay somebody the equivalent of $22,000 a year, but you make that non-transferable money. You have to spend it yourself, and then you could give it to every kid there is in the country too. No interest, you can't lend it, you can't borrow any money. All you can do is you get that money and you work. And they figured at that time, the workforce there was, and the knowledge they had, all anybody would have to work was 4 hours a day, 8 months of the year, to keep the economy and supply everybody with goods and services.
Is that right?
Now think what the strides have been made since then. That's 60 years ago. So you could probably cut this down to 2 hours a day, 6 months of the year, and have all this money to spend in the meantime, you know, but you had to spend it yourself, and you can't drink that much.
You can't eat that much?
You can't eat that much, so that the system would work, but there'd be no multimillionaires.
Everyone would have the same.
Not necessary, because the people aren't
They'd have
the same.
the same income.
Same income. But no two people want to do the same thing with their money.
That's right. Some want to spend it and some want to count it.
But the only reason is because it's worth more not spent than it is being spent. That interest, and all you got to do is listen to the government and tell you what that interest is doing to us. It's a big debt that we got. All the money in the banks is debts. It goes onto the red side of the ledger the minute it goes into the bank, until some jackass comes along and bores it. Then it goes over to the black. and all our smart people can't figure that out. Well, maybe I'm not very smart, but I figured that out a long time ago. And if it wasn't for my family, I wouldn't worry if I had a nickel.
Is that right? Well, maybe that's the way to be. I don't know. Not many of us feel like that, though, in this day and age.
Well, the only reason is, though, because I don't want them to go through the same thing that I went through, this struggle, that when you had to go and haul a load of 4 yards of gravel to get enough money so you could buy yourself a beer, and they were only 10 cents a glass, because the farm just didn't pay.
That's right. And butter was 10 cents a pound and all that sort of thing.
Those things were relevant in a way. Gasoline was $3 for a gallon, after 3 gallons for $1 through the hard times there. After the cars started running, it could have been for a while.
25 cents, yeah. What about, well, we better not get too deep into this.
We're finished with that now.
We'll just leave that one. How about telling us about some of the businesses as you remember them from years ago?
Well, I think we had a pretty good town as far after I started doing business. When my dad started out mostly in business after my grandfather left, was trying to borrow $100 at harvest time. Of course, the banks were the only places by this time to borrow money in. Is if your credit, if you didn't have anything, you had an awful time getting $100 to buy your twine and things like that for harvest. And the thing that I still can't understand is, if you don't establish a credit, you can't borrow any money.
Apparently, yeah.
So you have. How are you going to establish your credit if they won't lend you some money? See if you're going to pay it back. You see, so that hasn't changed.
Yeah, it's like which came first, the hen or the egg. Eh?
So, but the business places, I think, were pretty good. We had everything there was to have. A couple of hardware stores. There was, I think, 4 banks at one time.
4 banks, is that right?
3 or 4 anyway. And then before my time, they had money lenders, you know, here in town, that business like private bankers.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
And there were some pretty good machine shops?
Oh, the machines.
Could you tell us about some of those?
Well, the really old ones, but the first 2 blacksmiths, the first one I really knew was Mr. Wilson, Magnus Wilson. That was Robert's grandfather.
Yeah.
He was a blacksmith. And then there was Mr. Eccles was a blacksmith. He was a pretty good. And then there was one down at Golden Stream. You probably knew him. Nickel McLean.
Right.
And he moved into town, but I guess he didn't work after he came.
He had retired before he.
So we had those part of it. Then the McCaskill, what was it, McAllister, Fleck and McAllister. Then they set up and they worked for years here. They came over from Ireland as young people and set up in where the blacksmith shop is now, or the machine shop, and give real good service before there was any welding outfits and things like this. No, we never had any
And what were some of the machine shops? You know, like
What do you mean, machinery salesmen?
machinery sales, yeah.
Well, we had Cockshut, we had International.
What, would Bob Scott have been the first?
No, Rod McCastle had Cockshut.
Oh, did he?
But
That would be
Rod's
Rod
father, senior, then when Rod came to town, he took over all this. Like his dad never sold much, but he had the Cockshut and the International. And then Prosser, he had what do they call that? The yellow ones.
Alice Chalmers?
Oh, there was one of them too, but there was another one. They were all yellow. Alice Chalmers was orange. And well, of course, they had Massey Harris. Case.
You mentioned about someone selling machinery in where the hotel is now, where the Gladstone.
Well, McCaskill and Adamson's had that 10 years,
did they?
originally, yeah. Oh, yeah, I've seen miners and plows and stuff on that floor in the beer parlor there where it is now.
And Vern McNair, he was a Cracker Jack.
He was pretty good,
salesman,
yeah.
wasn't he?
But if you didn't like it, he was pretty slippery, too. Nobody's ever caught him.
But nobody ever got him out of bed in the morning because he was up and going at 5 o'clock, wasn't he?
He was quite a character, I'll tell you. He hated the government like poison.
Did he?
Oh, that tax boy, he could just...
Yeah, he was a character that anyone
He
who
was a
ever knew
character,
him
that's
would
right.
never forget him. And he's done lots of good deeds in his...
Oh, I think so, more than anybody knows. I know we always got along with him good.
Another one that crosses my mind was D.B. Hembrough. He was in business
Well,
for a long time.
There was only one of him, I think, in
Yeah,
this world ever.
and he did a lot of...
I think he did
He helped a lot
of
of
ways.
people out. During
But he was a character. I see him sit in the beer parlor, and he'd sell somebody, a farmer be in there having a beer with him. He'd sell him a pig or something. The old DB, settle on the price. He'd write him out a check. They'd sit there and drink, and the farmer would go broke. So he wanted some money. So the DB say, "Here's, I'll cash that check for you. Knock $1 off, You end up getting the check back and the hog for $1 less." Yes.
Well, he had quite a farm south of Gladstone, so he was always dealing with cattle.
Well,
and
he
livestock.
was a cab buyer, yeah.
Yeah. Also, there was the Young Men's Club that you belonged to. This, did you? Could you tell us about the Young
well,
Men's
they weren't
Club?
all young. They weren't really young. They were all the businessmen in town.
Oh, were they?
Yeah.
Well, then it would be a businessmen's club, wasn't it?
Oh, no, they didn't want that to interfere because they were pretended to be friends,
Even the competitors.
Yeah. No, it was lots of fun. I got a little bang out of that for a few years.
What was it about? And who were
Well,
the
they
people
would discuss problems, and try to reach a amiable solution.
Common ground.
Common ground, but nobody ever taught anybody else anything, but we had a good lunch after every meeting, and because they were held in the houses, you see, and each lady tried to outdo the other because you'd go home and tell what that woman had done, so the next time you get a pretty good deal, that could mount to quite a bit by the time of the end of the season.
So it was a good club to belong to?
It was a good club to belong to. Same with the Chamber of Commerce, and they're still the same.
Oh,
They don't agree
go to
on
one
anything.
another's houses.
No, not anymore.
No.
But
It was along that line then, was it?
That's right. Discussed the general problems and business problems and.
Was there a chamber at that time, or
Oh, yeah.
There was a chamber.
Oh, there
as
still
well?
was a Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, I
yeah.
see. It didn't take the
The
place
two
of.
different. One was more or less of a social gathering, you see, and the
It was
other
less,
one was
more or less formal.
yeah. Well, it was held in houses all the time.
Yeah.
And then, no, I belonged to the Chamber of Commerce too for quite a while.
I see.
Only farmer that ever did that I know of. Then.
At that time.
Yeah.
Well, there's been a few since. But
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm a sort of pioneer in my own way.
Well, we're going to have a little break now, Walter.
Are we?
Yep, we're going to have a little
Good.
break.
My brain's starting to rust.
And we'll be right back.
Yeah.
Walter, when you were a young fella, you spent some time working in Winnipeg. What were you working at?
I worked for Winnipeg Electric. I started out as a car washer, and in the wintertime I kept the fires going in the streetcars at night.
Uh-huh.
And from there I graduated into what they called the pit as maintenance on undercarriage on the streetcars.
You said you kept the fires going in the
Wintertime.
In the wintertime.
At night.
Where?
In the streetcars. They all had stoves in them.
Oh! I suppose. Yeah, it would be different
Burnt
than that.
coke.
Did they?
So there was only about 2 hours and 24. There wasn't a car out on the road, but then they were what they called the work cars. They'd take the men home from work. Mm-hmm. And then they'd go out in the morning and take the first bunch to bring in the first bunch. You see, then.
Oh yes.
And then by 7 o'clock, everything was rolling.
Mm-hmm. About what period of time was this? In the late.
This was 1926 or 27.
As a young man, what did you think of this way of life at that time?
Well, I didn't chase girls, unfortunately, and
maybe that was fortunate.
And I was working nights most of the time, so and 6 days a week, and usually my day off was during the week, so I just later on went to Eaton's and run around Eaton's for an hour or so, bought myself 6 chocolate bars and some cream puffs at Eaton's, and I went back home and ate them. And that was my day off, basically. Mm-hmm. I'd go to a show, like you only worked 8 hours a day, so I'd go to a show, the best shows in the country. Mm-hmm. Beautiful shows in those days. They weren't like they are today.
They were
theater.
Yeah, but was it before there was talkies, or?
Oh, it started
It'd
before
be
the
silent
talkies.
movies,
Yeah,
wouldn't it?
silent movies.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Walker's Theater there was quite a few live plays too. Like they had quite what do you call it? Opera houses, and where they showed vaudeville houses. Like there was 2 or 3 of them, which they showed top class performances, live. Mm-hmm. Like the Capitol, it had about a 10-15 piece band that was there in the theater all the time.
Oh, is that right? What about the traffic? You said you were working for Winnipeg.
Well, the traffic
what was it like in those days?
Well, there wasn't any traffic. It was just streetcars and a few buses. On the side streets, there was a few buses, like bringing feeders, but otherwise there was very few cars. There was still, I think, more horses than trucks.
Was there?
Like the delivery vans and Eaton's drove horses. Hudson Bay had a few trucks, but Eaton's didn't have any that I ever saw while I was in there. They were all beautiful horses on the delivery wagons, and then the drays, the big dray companies, the breweries all had big horses.
Did they?
Oh yeah, just beautiful horses. Mm-hmm. So the truck traffic was practically nil, and then of course I told you before, the cars, those that had cars, they were in the garages. They only used them on weekends.
They didn't use them for going. They didn't go to work in their vehicles.
No, that was unheard of. Mm-hmm. And there was probably 150 men working where I was, and I don't think any of them ever come to work in a car.
Is that right? So, and it would be streetcars you were working on, not buses, eh?
Oh, there was very, very few buses. Mm-hmm. No streetcars. They had 200 or 300 of them.
Is that right?
And I worked at the main barn for a while. They had three storage places where they went at night. There was one in Fort Rouge and one in the main barn down by the Main Street Bridge, and there was one up at the Gladstone Avenue on the north end where they stored, and they were outside, a lot of them, You'd walk up and down in the wintertime and keep the fires going. So it was good. And pretty dirty job underneath when the weather was bad, working under them. We worked in pits like you see them in the garages sometimes. And when they were out and come in icy, they got pretty mucky underneath there when the stuff started to melt.
So when do you think people started going to work in their cars?
Well, that was long after I left the city.
So it was sometime later.
Oh, yeah, because really, you see, the 30s, cars weren't being used too much in the 30s yet.
No, those were the Depression years.
Yeah. Those that
A lot of people maybe had cars and they
all the Model
them on blocks.
Model
couldn't
T's
afford to
turned
drive
into
them.
Bennett buggies.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
In a lot of places in the country.
Yeah.
You know, we spoke a while ago about the businesses in Gladstone long ago. Now, when you came out here, was were Galloway brothers still?
I'm not that sure about that. They
In
could
the
have been,
store?
but it wasn't very long afterwards that Collins and Diamonds took over.
But Galloway's, or Mr. Bill Galloway, still had the ranch, did he? And was
Oh yeah, that he had it till he died.
and was purchasing cattle and
Well, they had cattle, but this time, of course, he was getting to be an elderly man, and he just more or less little bit of a hobby on the farm there. You know, Roper was supposed to kind of look after things, but I got to be pretty friendly with Mr. Galloway, and we went and made a couple of trips up north there and I used to go and haul his bulls whenever he bought a bull for things like that. We got to be pretty good friends, and bought quite a bit of lumber. We were up to north of Roblin a couple of times.
where did he ship all these cattle that he bought? Like he bought them?
No, he wasn't in the buy. They raised them.
Oh, they did.
They had
Oh, I thought they
sections
bought
of
them and
land out
sold
there.
them out west.
no. Oh, that was when the railroad went through.
Oh, I
With the
see.
C&R Railroad. The Galloway brothers supplied all the food, like the meat for the railway gangs, right up, I think, to Saskatoon or Edmonton.
Is that right? That would be quite a contract.
Well, they'd have to go ahead. The settlers, some of the settlers were there, and they'd go ahead. You see, and have to buy cattle along the way for to feed the gangs as they moved further west. Eh?
This would help stimulate local economy wherever they were making these
Well-
cattle purchases, wouldn't it?
They said when we came out here, there was 24 clerks working in the store over here. They had a
I've heard
milliner's
as high as
shop.
28.
Yeah, well, the round figures,
Yeah.
I wouldn't know exactly, but they had a milliner's shop. They could make ladies' hats and all these things that
And it was
were-
a two-story
yeah, oh yeah.
store.
They had those old carriers where they carry the money for the change, you know. Did you ever see them work?
I don't remember them working. But did Collins and Diamond still use that system?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
where
yeah.
the money came down, didn't it, to the
Well,
main
along
till?
the track. They had it up above where those steps used to go.
Yes.
A little alcove up to one side there
Right.
where the cash was. And they just get the bill and they'd put it in a little box and pull a trigger and it compressed air or something. I don't know what did it, but
Automation.
it just was
The
at
beginning
that
of our
time, yeah, beginning of automation. No, it was quite a store. Of course, they were quite the operators too. They had some timber lots up west here, and I guess they were pretty well fixed at one time.
It was a pretty big company.
Yeah. Just the two brothers.
Now, you have always been interested in sports, Walter.
Well,
And,
the best of-
and I dare say, like all your family were very interested in sports, weren't they? But what about the hockey teams? Can you remember?
Well, I never
about
played
the
hockey.
hockey
Oh,
games?
shinny up at the school, up at home there, we used to play shinny out and even walk out into the marsh there and play on some of those lakes that are dry now. But personally, I just was more involved with the management and the work end of it with hockey in town here. After I grew up, got through school, I got quite involved with hockey. And
Where did they play? Where was the rink? At that?
well, the first rink was over here where the
Motel?
motel is. There was a hotel there, and
That was the Travelers Hotel?
Travelers, and they built a open air rink on the east side of that and used the old back kitchen for a waiting room. And then when Mr. Wynn opened up the hotel again, fixed it all up, they moved over there to east of the church, west of the church, next to the where the curling rink was already built then.
On Broadfoot Street.
On Broadfoot Street, I guess. And they moved it over there. I went to Keys and got a box car and moved it down for a waiting room. And played hockey there for a few years till they built the closed-in rink.
Who would they be some of the players at that time that you remember the earlier?
Well, it was the Gladstone rink was comprised of Clarence Sheridan, and basically there was the two Claytons, Percy and Alfie, Clarence Sheridan, 2 or 3 bunties whenever they happened to buntings, was Graham and Robert and Ted and Art McLennan, Roper Galloway. All that's pretty near enough. They played, and Clarence Sheridan could break a 1-inch board with his puck shooting.
Is that right?
Fantastic shot. And then there was a fellow who used to work for the H-Press that I think kept goal. Forget his name now. But they did.
Who would they be playing against? Was it
another
local team?
Westburn and Neepawa. I remember Westburn the most because they had like a pretty good team, and we were talking the other day about the Tafts there. There was a bunch of Tafts. Well, 2 of them were good enough. They went over to Glenboro and got a job over there for playing hockey.
Is that right?
And this one is well, they think they're both there yet. When the hockey career was over, one started up a trucking business. And well, as I said, their Hyla Sheridan here is their sister.
Were there any of those games that stand out in your mind? What's her?
Oh, they all stand out. But it's so long ago that I noticed some of them could jump over one another when they got going, especially Graham Bunting. No, it's a long time ago.
And people supported them, I dare say, pretty well
yeah.
at that
Well,
time.
there wasn't anything else, you know. There wasn't no television, no hardly any radio.
Yeah, very little, I
Very
suppose.
little gossip.
Just like now. The curling club. You have been a member of the Gladstone Curling Club for a long, long time, Walter. And possibly you're the oldest surviving member locally, are you?
I would imagine so.
If not the oldest, one of them anyway. And you're a life member of the curling club here, aren't you? So perhaps you could tell us about the old curling club as you recall it.
Well, when they built the rink that burnt down, that's when I got started. In fact, originally there was a rink down there around where the feed mill is there. That was the south end of town then. That I'm sure it blew down.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and there was no rink then for a number of years, and some of the old timers like the McCaskills and
that was an indoor curling rink at that time?
And combined with the skating too. There was, I think, I remember the ice was inside and middle, and the skating was sheet of ice on each side.
Oh, I see.
Sort of lean-tos, but it was a sprawling thing. I only was there once or twice. Well, then when the McCaskill, some Cresswells, and a lot of these old timers that were in business in town here decided to build this new one, they started to raise money with selling tickets somehow, and they got a foul of the law somewhere. It wasn't legal, and after a lot of wrangling, I think, if I remember correctly, they got Ralph Nye, I think it was, a lawyer from McGregor, took over the business, and he raised the money for them. How much he kept for himself, I don't know, but they finally got enough money to build the rink. And that was in 1930, I think. I started, I think, curling in 31. So, and from then on, of course, it was cold.
Was it open then, or was there a roof?
Oh, it was all closed in, but
was.
it was all steel, and that steel can get pretty cold in the wintertime.
I think it attracts the cold air. All right.
Well, eventually it sheeted in with wood and put a ceiling in it below, and it was like that till we put the artificial ice in. But I must tell you about the old days when we used to flood it with the horses. I did it a couple of years. Money was scarce. Always seemed to be scarce. It still is, it seems like it. And we got the fees down as low as $3 for anybody lived out of town. A mile out of town was at $3, and in town, inside that mile limit, was $5. Well, that wouldn't buy too many loaves of bread even then. But so a couple of years, I decided to flood it for them. Well, it took about a week, 10 days, depending on the weather. It was cold. Take a tank full of water, team of horses, bring them in 2.5 miles out of town where we lived. Put a tank of water on in the afternoon, put the horses away, have supper, and about 8 o'clock at night, go out, hook the horses up, go down to the river, and bail another tank of water, and put it on. And this took a long time. In fact, Freddie Motors, I think, was the first caretaker, 25 cents an hour.
Well.
And he worked for years, of course, at that.
He worked for years at it, and then
yes,
Power, I guess, took over?
I don't know whether Power was the first one or not.
Yeah. Oh, I thought maybe Power
Art,
and then Jeff.
I think Art was in there one time
was
before
he?
Power. I'm not just sure.
Anyway, the Moats have...
The Moat's been there a long time.
Made a lot of ice.
Yeah, made a lot of ice. And Fred, of course, turned to being a pretty good curler, too, and taught a lot of the other kids how to be good curlers. And he was a real gentleman on the ice and off.
That's right.
Then when the rink burnt down, of course, it was a incorporated club. It was a private club. And we had a little bit of trouble. I think the insurance was between $50,000 and $60,000, and we run into problems. The old curlers wanted to put the rink back where it was. And there's a bunch of newcomers come in, didn't want it. But this time, as this movement had started for getting things for nothing, you know, where
grants, you mean?
Well, not always grants, but like when they moved it over there, it was onto town property, and there would be no taxes. We paid taxes from 1960 till it burned down, or 30 till it burned down. When every year we went to the town, asked for a rebate on our taxes, but they always said, well, have you got any money? Yeah, we got enough to pay tax. Well, pay the taxes someday. When you don't have enough, we'll talk to you. So we kept paying taxes. So actually, nobody should have had a vote on how that money was spent, except the people that had been curling, the members.
The members.
Yeah, because it was...
The present members.
Yeah. But anyway, we got talked out of it. The first vote they had, it was supposed to go back where it was. And we had a bunch of newcomers wanting to come in to curl, and they got mixed up in this thing, and somehow or other they had a second vote, and it went to the fairgrounds. Well, of course, they've never paid any taxes since it went there. This is now a taxpayer's job, which I never wholly agreed with, because I feel that people that aren't involved shouldn't have to really pay for somebody else's fun.
Subsidize it, so to speak.
So, but anyway, that's the way it is. And of course, now if you can say that if you had the same kind of foresight as you have hindsight, then things might be different, because that's the place for it now. It's there because now the skating rink is there, and they've got a park there and a swimming pool, and so it turned out for the best. And of course, the money would have been turned over anyway, because everybody was civic minded. So that kind of then took over here, you see, and now they're having trouble financing. If you took all the money that was donated or collected or come from lottos and these grant system, they haven't. Nobody's ever paid their way. Well, we're having the same problem now with the curling golf club. You see, we've got a brand new.
Well, we're going to talk about the golf club later, so
well, I
we'll
think
just talk about the curling club.
I'm finished with the curling.
No, well, I'm not.
You're not? Oh, well, if you got something to say, that's fine.
Anyway, I would like to know, have you tell us about some of the curlers from way back that were exceptionally good curlers, and perhaps even some of the games that you remember.
Well, I think before my time, I curled with the McCaskill. I think old Rod showed me how to throw my first rock, and they were, I think, the best as a rink in the old days. They were the best, but then there was only a quarter, maybe less than that, curlers there are today.
Mm-hmm.
Today it's a profession. Thank God I curled when it wasn't. But young Rod turned, I think, to be one of the best skips and curlers in the town afterwards. He won a lot of prizes. I curled with an old timer that was a character, old Hembroff, D.B. Hembroff, that a lot away from home, not much at home.
He did a lot of curling away from town, didn't he?
Oh yeah, he went to Winnipeg all the time. He'd go to Neepawa, Portage. But he was such an erratic guy that you never knew which end was up with him. But
he must have been pretty colorful to curl.
Oh, well, they followed him around when he went to Winnipeg. We curled a game one night. I happened to be with him. It was Jack Baldwin. He was the druggist here, and his old prize, Kinney.
Spike Kinney?
Spike, who was lucky if he didn't get drunk every hospital he went to. But anyway, this week curling this night, and we're curling Doc Martin from Neepawa in Winnipeg in the grain exchange. 9 sheets ice, filled top and bottom, the gallery, right top and bottom, and old DB had his last rock. He had to make this shot to win the game. Well, I'm telling you, Jack and I were sweeping. We were playing lead and second. And he threw this rock of his, and I swear, he never, well, in those days, nobody ever got to the hog line anyway to throw a rock. There was no sliding.
Mm-hmm.
He never got up. We started sweeping before he let go, because we knew it was going to be slow. And we swept till our tongues were hanging out, and he never got up. And he was on his elbows and his knees, and he was doing this, and he started out hard, hard. And by the time he got to the far end, he's going, that rock stopped just where we wanted it. But we swept it there. He didn't throw it there. And I'm telling you, there was bedlam in that rink. They're just bedlam. Everybody clapped and cheered.
The 10th end, was it?
Yeah, the last end, last rock. And it won the game. And the old guy kind of slowly scrambles to his feet, and he takes his cap off and takes a bow. Well, I thought the roof was going to cave in.
A real showman.
Oh, and I don't think he knew what he was doing, really. But he was something else.
Well, it must have been fun to curl with someone like that.
It was at time, but other time you could have clubbed him over the head and fed him to the fish.
Well, it's a pleasure to have those kind of memories anyway.
Oh, yeah. Nowadays, everybody's out for, there's no more fun, it doesn't seem in any. You watch the games, there's no fun. There's nobody laughing, nobody smiling. They're talking to one another with radios in their pockets.
How has the game changed, other than...
Well, that has changed. That has changed it, that the will to win has become so strong. And, of course, today when you win money. There's money involved in pretty everything if you get up to the upper bracket. So this is the thing that I think all sport has deteriorated to a level where I don't even watch it anymore.
Oh, is that right?
Because every time I watch sport, I see dollar signs. It's just...
So do a lot of people who are playing, too.
So I just pretty give. I was a ball player for 20 years, and I don't watch baseball. I don't watch hockey.
There was something else I was going to ask you about the curling. What about the brooms? How do they differ?
Well, the brooms are a lot lighter, A lot more expensive. Kansas City bought one today for $24. Yeah, they used to pay $1.75 for one that had enough straw in it to make 3 of them today.
And there were no push brooms?
No, the Scotsmen brought those. The Scotsmen are responsible for them. But they've always apparently had push brooms. We saw push brooms in Scotland. There was one this lady had that we met. She had a warehouse full of rocks in her backyard. But there was one broom in there with a brush on the end of it. I'm sure it was made out of a root of a tree. And it was made like a scythe.
Oh.
Like the handle was a little scythe, and it had two handles coming out the scythe, like out the side, like a scythe handle, and hold on to it and sweep with this little brush.
Do you think that would be good or more?
Well, the others, of course, are made. You see, they're manufactured. But I had the first hockey stick I had. Of course, I got out of a willow tree. So just had the right kind of a bend in it. And
yeah,
it
it
just
worked.
shaved the sides. Oh, sure, it
It
worked.
worked.
No, it's these are the things like with curling. It's changed. It's got terribly expensive. That is the equipment.
And now you and Mabel have gone to a lot of games all over the world, haven't you?
Well,
Like to the Tankard and the
England,
Briar and
oh
Silver
yeah,
Broom.
mostly in this country. Well, we went to one in the States, couple, 2 or 3 in the States, and one overseas. The first one, I think it was the best one we were ever at too. That was in Perth, Scotland.
And that would be the Silver Broom, was it?
At that time, yeah.
Yeah.
They've changed that now. The Scots Tournament. Well, the Hearts is the lady, but they combine the two now, and it's still the Scots, I think.
Oh, yes. Baseball. That was always a love of the Ottos, wasn't it? Yourself?
Yes, although I was the only one that really, Art played a lot,
Oh, I
too
thought
later
Bob
on.
played a lot too, did he?
Bob did, but that was long after me, and not too long because he had to go to work. You see,
Oh,
he
yes.
was not it was fortunate to me. I didn't have to work. I lived on the farm. When you take the days off.
The farmers are going to love you, Walter.
Well, they were all farmers playing, most of them. The 3.
It was hardball.
Oh yeah, who would play that other game in the country?
Is that right?
They played that in Winnipeg when I worked in there. I played with a commercial league a bit, but they used what they called a softball, and it was 10 men, and they just wouldn't play that inside this room, like but now when they went into this fastball, the trouble with it is the ball, they can hit the ball further than a man can throw it. So that there's too many home runs if you hit it at all. It goes as far as a baseball does. And with the old softball, it was made to be played on corner lots, see?
Yeah.
So that it was restricted to area. And it was a far better game, faster, and because you didn't have much time, the bases were closer together, and of course this ball wouldn't go as far, so that anything that went over practically an infielder was a home run. Now they're out there in the field so doggone far in this fastball that they can't throw the balls in when they do get hit. So that there's a lot of things that. But the old baseball, of course, it hasn't changed. It's still 90 feet in between the bases, and the only thing is there's nobody plays it anymore because it's a terribly expensive game.
What about, well, it is when you get into the pros anyway. isn't it?
Well, but if you want to pay, who can afford the $14, $15, $20 for a bat?
Yeah.
You break one,
yeah.
these local people. See, we went through the bat factory in Louisville, Kentucky, where the sluggers are made, and they told us there that they supply all the major leagues with bats for nothing, just for the
right.
advertising they get.
So who pays for the bats? The little people.
The little people.
There's no justice.
There sure is. I just about told the guy,
You should have it the other way around.
Come back and blow your factory up. I said, that's not fair. But they advertise, everybody's got his name on a bat, and then they get him for nothing.
Well, what about can you tell us about some of the players that you used to play with, some of those?
Well, the old reliables were Milt Younger, Stuart Broadfoot, Davy Smith, and myself, we have always been here since time began, like sort of. And then from then on, there was a lot of
Art
McLennan played some. You go back to Jimmy Moat played just about the time I was starting. And then, of course, I played a little bit with Wendell Mustard. Pitched a few balls
he was
to
an
him.
ardent ball player.
Yeah, oh, he never quit. See, he came back and played for years with a real good team they had here after the First World War.
Oh, yes.
Then he was still playing after I got going real good, which was just up to the Second World War. Oh, he just loved it. And he was a character.
Very much so.
Oh, he was a character.
There was always excitement when Wendell was around.
Get these
Lots of fun.
Whoopee cushions and stuff like that. He'd go around and slip them under somebody when they're going to sit down, you know. Yeah.
Now, you played with, what teams were you playing
Well,
with?
I sometimes I hired out or with Eden a little bit, and with Plumas sometimes, but I was never much to. I supported my home team. I wouldn't play with.
But you would play against Plumas or Eden?
Oh yeah,
or,
Plumas and Eden and Neepawa.
What about Gillespie? Did you play?
Well, those are before we got into the pros.
Before you got really good.
Yeah.
And
Out of school, just past the school age, like.
Oh, I see. That would include, what, did Albert Zervin play with?
Well, Albert, of course, is a little older than too, but with Albert,
he would have played with Gillespie, I suppose, was it?
He played with Gillespie, and I think he played with Helston. He played with us too, like we got him later
Fred
on.
Bonner.
Fred never played with us.
Oh,
played
no, but
against
did
him.
he played with Gillespie and
Fred
John
Al
Stace,
would-
I think.
Yeah, there was. I forget. And I know, of course, what was it you mentioned the other day there that. There was a couple of brothers there that played. That lived down in that area where the Florida Fawners were.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you kind of forget. I never was much at remembering names.
Well, Sports Day was a big thing here.
Yeah, it was once a
and it
year.
really brought out crowds then of people, didn't it?
Well, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
People really attended and supported their home teams.
And that was every town within, the area was had that one day a year.
And then you'd end up with a dance at night over in the old
everybody
town
had
hall.
a dance, yeah.
And the floor would be going like that.
Well, everybody didn't have one of those floating dance halls like we had.
A floating floor.
Floating floor. Yeah, there were some great old dancers in that place.
Now, you had, tell us about a memorable game in your lifetime. You pitched, didn't you?
Yeah, I pitched for pretty near 20 years. Well, the most memorable game was this one I was telling you, but I'm not going to mention any names this time.
Oh, shucks.
So anyway, we'd gone to Rapid City for this tournament, and we had a 5-inning game to start with against the Rapid City seniors, and I pitched that, and we won it. And then they got another fella in that was, the next game was a 7-inning game to pitch, and he wasn't doing very good. They had first bat, and they started out pitching, and these guys started hitting, and the score was either 5 or 6-0 in the first half. And there was nobody out, and the bases were loaded. So of course I call them the brain trust, our coaches, and when they finally somebody woke them up, and you got to do something about this. This isn't going very good, It's one of the first inning. So they called me back in, and the man on third scored. And we tied the game. That was made it either 6 or 7-0. The man, we played 7 innings. We tied it in the last half of the 7th, and we got another run in the last half of the 11th. That
was a long game.
That was a long game, but also I I only had one run scored on me in those 11 innings. That was scored from third base with nobody out.
And that was when you took over?
When I took over. And a team that's hot. In other words, there's sort of you get coasting, and then it's a little harder to stop sometimes than it is.
Enthusiasm and adrenaline and all that, eh?
And then we had to play another 5-inning game for the finals against Verdun. And Verdun had some hired players. They were a top-notch team. And I beat them. I pitched that game. So that was 21 innings.
That you pitched?
That day. And you listen to these $1 million men today, and if they pitch 5 or 6 innings, they got to have a week's rest.
How was your arm after?
Sore. Good and sore.
For how long?
Till the next tournament. So that was the most outstanding game I really had that I can remember that way from the pitching viewpoint. But we had some.
Sure.
We had some doozers.
It's wonderful to have those memories.
Yeah, and the enthusiasm. Like I'm gonna say this anyway again, but I had one person I don't think that liked me too well for those 10 or some years. It was Mrs. Davy Smith, because I got to talk Davy into go to these tournaments, and of course they were milking quite a few cows, and of course she had to milk the cows every time you went away, you know. So I wasn't too popular with her, I don't think. So anyway, I think she's all right now. She's talking to me now.
I can relate to how she felt.
Because they milk quite a few cows. They're a big part of their income.
And I dare say Davy preferred playing ball to milking cows.
Well, I think if he had a choice, but I think he didn't mind either one. But there was days when, we needed him because he was our lead-off batter because he was hard to pitch to. He was so short. There wasn't much of a mark there to throw at, so he got an awful lot of walks.
The golf club. You've also been a member of the golf club for a long time.
That's pretty. I bet you 60 years. Oh, over 60 years.
Is that right? What was the old golf course like?
Well,
what are your earlier memories?
Just a pasture with some short grass on it. We used to cut that with a horse.
Oh, did
one horse.
One horse in the moor.
Yeah, about a 3-foot mower, I think it was.
Wonder how Ted would like that.
Yes, it was. And
what was it?
Well, it was a 9-hole course with sand greens, and to start out with, they didn't cut the rough.
Oh, I see.
I don't know. And I went to a lot of tournaments around the country, and to start with, the rough was never cut. So people were looking for balls most of the time. So they finally quit. A lot of them quit golfing. Because they
couldn't afford to.
Well, even at 25 cents a ball, you know, but the thing was there's so much time wasted. So they finally started cutting the fairway, off the roughs with, an ordinary mower. But we had, I was saying the other day there, we went, among the policemen here, everybody worked, the old timers and all the rest, and the old fellas were out there shoveling gravel to put the sand, but we thought we were all looking for something to make a good green, so Dick Toes and I went up with the truck to Amaranth and got a load of gypsum, and we put it on the 9th green. First time it rained, we had a cement green.
You weren't really popular.
You couldn't pitch a ball on it and go twice as far as afterwards, so we had to pick that all off and load it, take it away.
Did you have any volunteers to help you?
Well, I don't remember that. I think they said we were crazy to start with anyway.
Well, anybody who was against it being put there sure wouldn't.
Well, no, it was against it, because if you could find something that would take the place of this And then when they lost the thing, you see, we had a little controversy there about when the other course, when they lost this one, when Miss Wilson, Robert Wilson's dad sold it to Alfie Clayton, and we had after Mr. Crawford for years and years to try and see if we couldn't buy it. No, he never did ask Mr. Wilson. So we lost it, and because there was a little bit of hard feeling between the Claytons and the rest of the golf course club, because they used to complain that Clayton's chickens used to love that grit on the sand and on that 8th green by their house, and of course some of these older golfers didn't think that was a very good idea. But they never thought anything about going into their garden and looking for golf balls, trapping there.
Perhaps we should say where that old course was located. It was just on the north of Alfie's.
North of Alfie's, right all the way down the road. The 9th green was up at the, well, I imagine there's buildings there. Well, yeah, all those oil tanks and the
shell plant.
Clinic and they're all in that part of that land now. Mm-hmm. And the clubhouse was right at the north end of it. We went to move it one time. They wanted to move it into a different location. And I think in 1940, I just bought a new truck. And they wanted to move this thing. And I said, well, I can move it with the truck. And Mr. Kressel, who was kind of a contractor around town here, so he'd look out, give the directions and everything. So we got a chain or something around the building, hooked onto it, and get up, and gosh, all of a sudden the whole one wall started coming out. And it had been, posts had been stuck in the ground, and everything had been nailed to these posts. It wasn't loose. So we had quite a little hullabaloo there.
Have to be a change of plans.
Had to cut the posts off first. But everybody had a lot of fun there. I sure thought it was a...
And there was a lot of activity in those.
Oh yeah, they had their. Well, there wasn't that many. I was the only farmer golfing.
Oh, was that right?
Oh yeah, for years.
What about the Adamsons? Would they not have been?
They didn't golf for years after that. They had a little different father than I had.
What about then? There was land. Alfie offered some of his farmland, didn't he?
Well, yeah, so eventually he came around to them and offered them this land, because we tried to get it back off them, but I'm sure glad they didn't now. Because
where the present site is, yeah.
It's pretty hard to beat there. Now, mind you, Mother Nature helped a little there too, because the first 2 years they had it changed the whole contours of that course.
Is that right?
Flooding. Where the clubhouse was, the old clubhouse is sitting there, there was a quapara there where the wheels at high, and it was just barely the top rims of it showing when the height of the flood. So it washed dishes and it watched. You golf?
Occasionally.
There's that little where the ravine is there. That was washed out there one year.
And it's a beautiful course now.
Yeah.
And there are grass greens.
Yeah, and a big debt, of course.
Beautiful new clubhouse.
Quite a debt, though. That's a big sticker.
And a big debt. That's on the minus side. The debt's on the minus side.
Do you ever have any debts?
I always considered them on the minus side, not on the plus side.
No, they're on the plus side when you're talking about it, They don't add anything to it, but they're the ones that are in the forefront.
What about green fees years ago? What were they?
Oh, I don't remember. Probably the same as a curling fees, practically nothing. I don't remember that part of it.
You just remembered the good times.
Yep. And many a time I was down there and golfed by myself, walked down there on a Saturday night or something and golf for a couple hours.
You were...
Sunday mornings instead of going to church.
Is that right?
Yeah.
What about, you were saying, Mr. Crawford used to golf quite a bit out there.
Well, he was a pro, more or less. He was the best golfer in town at that time. He was, I'm sure he was runner-up for Canadian championship in amateur championship one year in played off in Montreal.
Is that
and
right?
Lost out.
Well, that's pretty good.
But he played like a machine.
Did he?
Yeah.
In what way?
Well, the ball always went the same distance, and you know, he never extended himself to try and go another 20 yards like.
Oh, I see.
He just played like a machine, you know, and he got pretty good at it. But he was.
Accuracy.
I was telling you, he carried a shovel a few times with him, dig a ball out of a gopher hole.
He didn't want to lose any more than he had to.
Yeah, he was quite a guy. You know.
What did it mean to the community at that time when we had the old course?
Well, I think, see, a lot of these things were rich man's games. They were the so-called the businessman's game. The common man didn't golf, didn't curl.
They wouldn't be aware of what all was involved.
Well,
the pleasure of it.
In the first place, to start with, you'd see if you lived in town, you had the opportunity. But if you didn't live in town, how far are you going to go with a team of horses? See, that it wasn't in our vocabulary. I am probably the sort of a misfit that got involved in all these things before my time.
And that's because you weren't chasing women.
Well, I think that would be the last thing I'd attribute to, but I think I'd had maybe more fun with the women, but at least I'd had company.
But now it has a whole different meaning to the community as a whole, doesn't it? Don't you feel?
Well, I think yes, because circumstances are different, and I think that the thing is today, it's getting so expensive because of taxes. We look at things, still look at things as luxuries that are necessities. We haven't learned how to live with leisure. And leisure, no, leisure is being forced on us, but we don't have the wherewithal to make the best use of this leisure.
Why?
It's cost too much. Everything boils down to dollars and cents. When we talk about our club here, we're talking quite a bit of money. There's people complaining about the fees, and we owe $40,000 or whatever it is now, paying interest. And some are complaining about the fees being too high. But when you go to a city club, and it costs you $500 or something just to join it, then pay your yearly fees, and there's lots of places where they have monthly fees that if you don't spend that in the clubhouse, you're charged with it anyway.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, yeah.
And you have to get up perhaps at 5 o'clock in the morning to get on the green?
Yeah. But the thing is, we've got lots of land. Why can't we build enough golf courses and make them available
to accommodate
the people
needs.
that who are becoming having more leisure time? See, that's always been my contention, that we haven't learned how to live with leisure time. Our old folks, my grandfather and grandparents, there was no such a thing as leisure time. There were no golf courses. In their day, there was no curling rinks. There was no skating rinks. No golf courses.
Your own pleasure was going to church on Sunday.
Sunday, then most of them did.
Sitting in the rocking chair.
Or they read the Bible at home, and many a time we gathered around the kitchen table, and Dad would read the Bible to us on Sunday because we were 2.5 miles out of town. And we drove horses all week. A lot of farmers didn't have extra horses. So we've graduated from all of this into a people in North America of leisure, lots of it, and we don't know what to do with it. Get in the car and kill one another, that's not my idea of leisure. Or to drive 1,000 miles on a weekend, come back ragged. And this is what people are doing by the thousands. So my theory is we haven't learned how to live with leisure, what to do with it. And we're getting less and less work to do all the time. Because either that or there's less and less people working that have nothing else but leisure. But they also don't have any money.
Yes, they have to be working to have the income to
even partly
involve themselves with
Yeah.
the leisure programs.
It's a terrible state of affairs for intelligent people.
An intelligent race, eh?
I've lost me dunes again.
Here, it goes in this slot. Anyway, this is sort of leading up to a couple of questions I had to ask you. And one is, as you look back over the years and your 80 plus years, what has given you the most satisfaction in life?
I think maybe the most satisfying, if I really get down to the nitty-gritty, is say that I stayed sane, reasonably sane.
Well, now that's a surprise. I wouldn't have thought of you saying something like that. Now, why would you say that?
Well, in my life has been a terrible turmoil.
It has?
Yes, because of the way I talk and the way I think.
Oh, like I would think someone like you have led a quiet, stable country life. Not too much turmoil.
Well, everything I said belies that. That you've got on that tape. There's not a thing in there that even substantiates that statement.
I suppose you've been a thinker.
A thinker and a doer. But not what everybody else was doing. And the thinking part of it is when I answered your question the way I did, is that I am glad that I stayed reasonably sane, because to me the world has been a mess. Maybe nobody else felt it the same as I did, but it is and was and probably will be for some time to come, unless somebody gets up and does something about it.
But there has always been this consternation and aggravation down through the centuries, hasn't it?
That's because we don't learn from lessons. Because there is a motivation there somewhere that's deliberate, I think. Because people aren't like that with each other. It's only collectively that they act like idiots. Your neighbor will come rushing to your help the minute some little thing goes wrong, which kind of restores your faith in humanity a little bit, but collectively they're a bunch of idiots. So the fact is, because there's always been a lust for power, apparently, that makes this permissible. And of course the leading part, that we're willing to listen and that we worship heroes. We have, and it's so prevalent today that our heroes we worship today have nothing to do with living or how they act or how they live, what their morals are, or anything else. It's how much money they make. Those are our heroes today. Nothing to do with morals or any of these things that used to be maybe the leading factor. At least they preached it.
Well, we have had a few heroes that weren't just...
We have had them. Where are they? What have we got today, though? You see, if you got 10,000 stinkers and one good person over here, you don't talk about that one person. You can't change anything by talking about that guy. You got to go talking about those thousands. That's where your changes are going to take place, and this is why we concentrate on a hero. And all the rest of them, but they don't matter. I wouldn't walk across the street if that guy wasn't playing hockey. I wouldn't be there. See? They don't go there to watch the game.
Yeah, I see what you mean there.
And this is our civilization today in North America. Now, what it's like in all these countries where we're sending troops to and things like this, I don't know. I've got to take somebody else's word for that. But I do know, at least I think I know, what is going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on somebody else's word for what's going on somewhere else.
Okay, now this leads me to my second question. In all these turbulent times, throughout the whole world, and that's the way it seems to be as we look at it, even though the Cold War is passé and there really isn't a major war taking place at this precise moment, what would you, Walter Otto, suggest we do about it? If you had the power to do something about it, what would you do?
Well, that's a pretty tricky one. That's pretty sticky, I should say. Because if I had the power, I'd probably do the same thing that, for my translation of Christianity, is the same thing that God would have done. He had the power, apparently, to prevent all of these things, but we'd have been robots.
Mm-hmm.
And until such times as we decide for ourselves, it'll never happen. And this is what information I got from my dad through the years that I knew him, is that we are strictly on our own. And as long as we keep listening to the wrong people, it'll stay that way. Now, we may not be quite as bad over religious fanaticism as we say the Muslims and India with its untouchables and all the rest of these things that go on in the world. But we're not far behind them. We've fragmented our own religion so badly in the last 20, 30 years that we don't know what religion anybody believes in anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But you can bet your life on it that at the bottom of that somewhere there's $1 involved.
Well,
everything is done for money and or power, and of course they usually go together.
and do you think this is ever going to change?
Well, it has to change, or we're done. We're finished.
That we'll put other values ahead of the dollar?
We have them already. Basically the Christian spirit is in people. Mm-hmm. I don't think it matters where you go in any country. If you have the ability to help somebody, you'll help them. But survival is still the biggest instinct. So you don't want to be a martyr, eh?
No.
And this is the way it is. I had to change a lot of things I couldn't do because once originally I said I'd never get married. So because I didn't want to be responsible for bringing any children into the kind of a world that this is.
Is that right?
But I got sidetracked.
Mm-hmm. Well, you met Mabel, and that changed your plan.
Okay, so I have to do the best because I'm responsible for those children.
Right.
So maybe all my good intentions are fine as long as it doesn't interfere with their livelihood. So that this to me is elementary. But most people aren't that serious as I am. So I got stuck with the family.
Well,
and the responsibilities.
Yeah.
That
well, you
I
maybe
swore,
got stuck with the responsibility, but not stuck with the family.
That I swore that I was never going to have. Same thing.
But
literally.
Perhaps if we all looked at it as seriously as you have, then we would look at it in a more positive manner for humanity. And
well, what's wrong with I'm positive.
I say, if we looked at it in your light, then we would become more interested in saving humanity rather than individual dollars being saved, eh?
Well, it took a long time. You see, this is when you start out, like I started out going to school pretty 80 years ago. And right from day one, it's drilled into you to save money for a rainy day. And every dollar you save is a debt. Now, I learned that through mathematics. Then there's a lot more smarter mathematicians than I am that don't practice that, don't preach that, and yet our government depends on mathematicians, accountants, and one thing another to tell them how to spend their money.
To run the country.
To run the country. So what is a poor slob like me going to do? Butt my head against the wall for the rest of my life and die probably happy because it'd be the finish of it all. Yet you want to live and live and live. It's
something that's within us.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's within us.
And the hope that springs eternal with somebody that does think about what things are going. Yeah. It isn't easy.
No, I'm sure it isn't. No, it isn't easy. There's no pat answer for it.
No.
Anyway, Walter, it's been really enjoyable talking to you. It's been most enlightening, and perhaps we'll have you back some other day.
Well,
so
thank you very much for asking me, but it hasn't been all beer and Skittles.
Anyway, there's been a lot of fun moments too.
Oh, yes.
So I'd just like to say good night to our viewers now. And once again, thank you, Walter.
Hope it didn't bore you too much.
Thanks for joining us for tonight's interview. Watch Channel 12 for information about our next edition of Community Camera. Good night.